Oh, hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video...
Whoa, get out of it, you, Missy. I've been a right slacker with my camera. I've barely captured my family recently, but my daughter, she goes down to a horse haven where they actually care and look after sick ponies, and I got a load of photos the other day, and so I wanted to share with you guys my process about how I quickly get through photos inside of Lightroom. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Whoa! You're going to the park. Okay, off you go. Okay, here we are inside of Lightroom's library, and what we're going to do is import the photos. That's our starting point. And over here you can see the organization of my catalog. So I have the months with a number in front so that orders sequentially. And then I also have a folder called Photos to Sort. And within that, I have my newest photos. So these are the ones that I took the other day. It's a pretty straightforward set of photos. There's nothing out of the ordinary, nothing difficult in here. So hopefully the tools and techniques I share with you guys here today will be things that are applicable to you guys, and you can start implementing them in your editing process as well. So first of all, we want to build previews when we bring our photos in, and I find standard is good enough. I'm not working on other computers or offline or anything, so don't worry about building smart previews. And the develop setting is really important. Normally what I do is come down to my basic imports, and I have this basic import all set up, and that will go through all of the photos, apply this preset, and the photos will actually all be looking pretty good straight on import. But I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to import them as they are, and that way we're going to be able to build the edit together, and you can see exactly what settings I do and what I do within Lightroom. And as you can see, the photos are actually changing as they're being brought into Lightroom. You might think, why is it going through and actually changing the thumbnail images here? Why are they actually starting to look worse as they get loaded into Lightroom? Well, the initial thumbnail that we see is the JPEG that comes from the camera, but what we're looking at now is an interpretation of just the raw file with zero editing applied. The first thing I like to do with my photos is rename them with the date. So I'm going to press Ctrl A to select all, and then I'm going to press F2, which brings up our rename photos. From here, I select my own custom naming format, which has the year, then the month, then the date, followed by the hours, minutes, and seconds. So it's basically the date in reverse, and that means whenever we look at our photos outside of Lightroom, they'll always be in the correct chronological order. So I'm just going to choose that and click OK. My camera's native file format is the Nikon electronic file, NEF, but whatever format your camera saves its raw files as, what I would recommend doing is actually coming over to the library section and converting your photos into DNG. For my personal photos, occasionally I will use the lossy compression because the file we're left with is still really good quality, but it's a fraction of the size. But if you want to keep the absolute maximum quality, don't check this box. I'm capturing off of a 45 megapixel camera, so a JPEG preview that's just a medium size is acceptable, and I'm going to click OK. Now, as Lightroom converts those, let me explain why I do that and why it's really important. The camera's native file format cannot save any changes that we might make inside of the develop module here. So let's say we brought the highlights down and we boosted the shadows up and we'd made a whole load of other changes. If we take this photo away from the Lightroom catalog, all of the editing instructions that we've done in the develop module will be lost. The same goes for, heaven forbid, your Lightroom catalog becomes corrupted. Again, you've lost all of that information about how you want to process the photo. If, however, you're working on a DNG file, all of these changes that you make here can be saved directly into the file. So let's say worst case scenario, your Lightroom catalog becomes corrupted. You can actually rebuild the whole catalog with all the edits that you've made to your photos still intact. So for me, that is a really big benefit of using DNG files, and that feature has come to my aid before and saved me when a wedding photography catalog got corrupted. Okay, let's reset this, and now comes the fun part. I want to get back to my grid view, so I'm going to press G, and now I just want to find a photo that we can work on. Okay, really not the greatest set of photos I've ever taken, but let's start with this one just because there's two people in it. So here's my daughter with her friend Lexi, both helping out at this horse haven. What we're going to do is a generic edit on this photo, and then we're going to synchronize all of those changes across the entire set. That's going to get all of the photos looking much, much better. And then when we've done that, I'm going to share with you what I've found to be the quickest way to go through and make fine-tune adjustments in your photos so that ultimately the entire set looks really good. But let's start with this edit. Let's jump into the basic section here. We want to make absolutely sure that we have the correct profile applied. Using Adobe Color is okay, but it's a generic profile. If you come into the browse section, you're going to find that you have camera matching profiles, and these are going to do a much better job of matching the colors in the photo more accurately to your camera. What you have available to you here depends on what your camera manufacturer has supplied to Adobe for them to put into Lightroom, but I prefer to work with either a neutral or a flat profile. Now you might think that that doesn't look very good. If you jump to landscape, oh, that's got a lot more punch. It's much more contrasty, much more interesting. The reason I like to go for a camera flat or neutral profile is because it gives you a greater dynamic range to work with from the file, and then you're able to actually control the contrast and bring it back in yourself. So we'll select that, close it down. Of course we can control our white balance, but what I like to do is set my camera to auto white balance, and for the most part I trust it. I'm not going to make any changes here, but if I do need to alter the white balance, I'll show you guys later what I think is a better and quicker way to do that. We are also going to make the assumption that our exposure is correct. I mentioned before that we are going to create the contrast in the file ourselves, but contrary to what you might think, we don't actually want to do it with the contrast slider. Because I deliberately shot this photo into the sun, deliberately trying to get a bit of flare and a certain vibe to this photo, our blacks are completely washed out. So if we were to grab the black point here, we can bring it down, and I've got the little triangle ticked here so that we actually see, just in this bottom right hand corner, where we're actually starting to clip to pure black. But because this photo was a little bit washed out, I probably don't think this is actually a great example for us to work on. So what I'm going to do is reset the black, and I'm going to jump to a photo that has a more full tonal range. So perhaps one of these ones with this crazy looking goat. Okay, we can see here that we start at pretty much black point and we're pushing almost to pure white here. We're going to jump into the profile section again, and we're going to quickly choose flat profile, and all of a sudden you can see all of that detail come back in the shadow area of the goat here. And that's what I'm talking about when I refer to a greater dynamic range in the file. If you compare the landscape option, all the shadows are almost crushed down to pure black, whereas if we go for a flat profile, we've got all of that detail to work with. Let's close this down and jump back to where we were. The highlights, shadows, whites and blacks is a really important place to work. Basically, we can bring our highlights down so that we're not bleaching things out. And I've found over the years a good recipe for getting these in a good place is to drop the highlights down anywhere from 20 to 30, something like that. Boost the shadows up by around the same amount, so plus 30. I will usually bring the white point up whilst keeping my eye on the histogram, just so that we start to have a pure white point in this photo. But as I push it towards a pure white point, and I turn this little marker on here so that we can see where we are starting to clip, some of the colours start to get a bit distorted when you push things that far. So we're starting to lose the rich blue that we had in the sky, and it's starting to go a bit of a weirdy colour. So what I like to do is lift my whites up, but I like to err on the side of caution, because we're creating a generic edit here that we're going to apply to all photos. So we don't want to be too aggressive with these sliders. The blacks we want to bring down so that on our histogram, we're starting our curve in this bottom left hand corner. That's going to mean that we have a pure black point. And we can also see that because I've turned the triangle on, and we get these little blue warning markers. So I'll push that to the left, and you can see all of this area has turned to black. But I want to bring that up until we're just starting to hit the black. So that's at minus 16. But again, I want to err on the side of caution. So I'm just going to bring it up just a little bit. Let's dive into the present section. I'm not a big fan of the texture slider. I think things start to look a little bit too gritty and fake, so I don't really like that. But if you want to put some of that into your files, you can do, but I would recommend keeping it quite low. Clarity, I do like. If we push this all the way to the right, things start to get very contrasty when we push that all the way to 100, but with all these sliders, I think it's worth just grabbing them and playing around and seeing what the effect does. So like I say, I like clarity, but I don't want to be too aggressive with it. So I find somewhere around that plus 15 is a good starting point. The dehaze slider is worth having a look at as well. And as I push it to the right, you'll see that we do get a more contrasty image, but it also brings in more saturation as well. I don't mind this effect, so again, I'm going to just add it in, but with caution. So probably around plus 5 will do me. And if you can't get the slider exactly where you want it and you know a particular figure that you want to put in, you can just click and type that in. So for example, if I want to put in 10 for the vibrance, I can do that. Press tab to jump down to the next one, put 10 in for the saturation. I like to leave my tone curve alone because it's quite good for adding creative effects, and as we're creating quite a generic edit at the moment, you don't want to come in and do crazy things like color toning with your tone curve. As great as it is to play around and do that, and also add contrast in by adding in an S curve, for example, we can do all of those things. We could lift the blacks up, but I consider those creative effects, and what I like to do is keep that separate from my generic edits. So what we can do is hold the Alt or Option key, and that will change the adjustment to reset. We can click that and everything goes back to normal. Now we can close the tone curve down and jump into the next one, but you'll see that if I choose any other palette, the one that I was in before actually closes. And if you want to work in this way, just right click on any of these and choose solo mode. Because if you're not in solo mode and everything's open, I feel particularly if you're just starting, it can be just a little bit daunting, a little bit overwhelming. Okay, we don't need to worry about anything in this section. The color grading as well, this is also a creative technique. As I was saying before, I like to keep my creative edits separate to the fundamental edits, the ones that are going to get your exposure, white balance, and the contrast in a good place. So we don't need to worry about color grading, but let's look at the detail section here. Depending on the lenses you use and the size of your sensor will depend on the amount of sharpening that you want to add. If you take your photos from Lightroom into another application afterwards, Photoshop, Luminar, whatever, you may want to keep your sharpening quite low and do that as a final pass in one of those programs. However, for this video, I'm going to make the assumption that Lightroom is our start and our finish point. So we need to get our sharpening looking good. So let's zoom into our picture, and you can see here as the goat was moving that I missed my focus point on the eye. So even though it's an animal, I still tried to focus on the eye of the creature here. But the ear looks pretty good. So let's have a play around with the sliders and just see what we want to do. So obviously the amount increases how much sharpening there is, and the radius is just looking at the comparison between adjacent pixels and how wide that comparison is. So a 3 pixel comparison means that you're going to get a stronger sharpening effect, but you're also going to potentially introduce more halos around the edges of objects. For my lenses, I like to keep my radius around 1.5 and I like to keep the amount probably around 75. We can add a bit of masking in, and if you want to see what your mask is actually doing, just hold the Alt or the Option key while you're sliding this and you will actually see where the white is. That's allowing the sharpening to show up. So around the edges, and Lightroom is looking for those edges. If you take it all away, the sharpening is applied to everywhere in the photo. And that's when you start to get sharpening appearing in areas that you probably don't want it. So a little bit of masking goes a long way. There's very little noise in the files of the D850, even at high ISOs. So it's not really necessary to control that, but let me just show you what that does. If we push the noise reduction all the way to 100, you'll see that we get quite a painterly look going on. Things don't look particularly believable, but it certainly smooths everything out. So if you're dealing with files that do have a lot of noise, what I suggest you do is just get this slider and wiggle it back and forth and just find what you feel is the sweet spot. Personally, I'm not afraid of a bit of noise in my files, and if we zoom all the way out, for the most part, you're not even going to see it anyway. So unless you're printing out your file really big or you've shot something at ISO 6400 or higher, I wouldn't worry too much about that. If your lenses suffer from a bit of optical distortion, i.e. they bulge out like this, or you get a bit of pin cushioning, this is called, you can come in and manually correct that in Lightroom. But what I would recommend you doing is just coming into the profile section here and just enable profile correction. And what Lightroom's going to do, as long as your lens exists in its database, it's going to find the make of your lens, which model it is, and then it's going to apply corrections accordingly. It's pretty clever stuff. One of the corrections is for that distortion that we were just talking about, and one is also for the vignetting. So that is the darkening around the corners that most lenses suffer from. And if you've ticked this box, Lightroom is going to do its best to get rid of it when this is set to 100. But personally, I quite like the vignetting of the lens. So I don't actually include any vignette correction in my edit, but you may find you may want it corrected, or you may want to kind of split the difference and go somewhere around that middle point. So for us, in this one, I'm going to put that around that sort of 29-30 mark, leave that there and say done. The Transformation panel is really useful and I use it a lot for my architectural photography, but just for your general captures and family photos, things like that, I really wouldn't worry about stuff like this. We don't need to worry about any vignetting, and we also don't need to worry about the calibration section here either. So I think our basic corrections are done, and what I can do is press the / key on the keyboard and that will show us our before, and this is our straight out of camera capture, and this is our after. So in the before we've got a lot of high contrast going on, it's almost looking a little underexposed. This is our after, and bearing in mind we haven't changed the white balance, we haven't boosted the exposure. I'd recommend all of those little adjustments, they're all done later, and I'll show you a better way to deal with that. How this photo is now is the point at which all of my photos get imported, because I apply a preset that does all of this for me when I bring the photos in. So I thought it'd be useful for me to show you guys exactly what I build into that preset. So now you know, let's save this preset. So we come over to the preset side, create preset, choose an appropriate group, and if you don't have one set up, select a new group and perhaps call it basic imports. And call it something sensible. So for example, the make of your camera, what the preset is, a basic import, and the year you created it. And now this part's really important. You just want to make sure that you're selecting only the changes you want to apply through this preset. So we added a profile. We didn't change the white balance or the exposure or the contrast, but we did change the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. We added a little texture, clarity, and dehaze. We also looked at the sharpening. We made changes to the saturation and vibrance, we brought those up, but we haven't made any individual color adjustments. Color grading is a creative look, so we're going to leave that out. We added some noise reduction, and we also did a little bit of lens correction. So what did we do? We added a profile correction. We didn't add any chromatic aberration, but I should have done. We did lens distortion and lens vignetting. No transformations, no extra effects. The process version and the calibration we don't need to worry about. If you've made an error like I have here with the chromatic aberration, I'll show you how you can correct that. So just create it as it is. We wanted the chromatic aberration to be included, so just tick that so we have that on now. And what we can do is come back over here to the basic imports, and now we have the preset that we just created. We just want to right click on this and we're going to update it with the current settings. That will take us back into this box. Nothing else has changed. We've just turned on the chromatic aberration correction, and so we just update. Now there was a goal to the way I was editing this. I'm not looking to make the best adjustment for this photo that you've ever seen. Certain things are individual to this photo but may not work for other photos. We just want to avoid that at this stage. We just want a generic edit that is going to work for all photos and basically improve them. So I'll come to the grid. Now this preset that we've just created, there's various ways that we could apply it in Lightroom, but what I'm going to do is press Ctrl A for select all, and I'm just going to come down to sync settings, and the checkboxes that we turned on before are still all selected, so we can just synchronize. Those settings are pasted throughout the set, and boom. If I scroll down here, you'll see that Lightroom just goes through and applies those changes that we just made. And straight away, optically, these photos start to look so much better. So if I choose any of these photos at random, if I come to the develop module, I can hit the / key and we're going to see our before, press the / key again and we see our after, and you can see that we have made an improvement to this. If you look at the donkey's face here, you can barely see anything that's going on. I'll toggle to our after and straight away you can see all of that detail in the fur on its face. And you can also see at 1/60th of a second, I can't hold my camera very still, and this shot's a little bit blurry, but it's okay. These are just memory snapshots, so I'm not too worried about it. Okay, I'm going to press G to jump back to grid mode. I'm going to scroll all the way to the top, and here's where I'll share this technique with you, where we can make quick adjustments to our photos. And using this technique is how I used to be able to go through and process an entire wedding, probably about 800, 900 photos, and get them turned around in about 3 or 4 hours. And I do that using the quick develop section over here. So we could work in the develop module over here and work with sliders individually. And my God, that pony looks like some White Walker thing with that blue eye there. It's a bit freaky. So yeah, we could come in here, grab the exposure slider, start bringing that up. Or we could grab the shadows and bring those up, bring the highlights down. But my preference is to come to the library section and work in the quick develop module. What we do is just select a photo. This one's underexposed and also we can't see into the shadows. So what I'd do is probably click the exposure button. And if I hover over that, you'll see that that increases the exposure by 1 stop. If I thought the shadows were still a little bit too dark here, I'd just click the shadow button. Not enough, I click it again. It's a really quick way to make adjustments, and if you have a couple of photos that were shot in the same conditions, so for example this horse's head here is very similar to my daughter patting it right here. Make sure auto sync is on, so there we go, we're automatically synchronizing between these two photos. And back in the library module I'm going to make some generic changes to improve this photo, and I do that by looking at the histogram, and I can see that I don't really have a pure black. And even without the histogram, just eyeballing this, you can see it's a little bit washed out. But what I'm going to do is boost the exposure up, maybe go one more, and that gets us a better exposure on this photo, but we don't have any black, so I'm going to grab the black. 3 clicks is too much, come back up one, and just click the single triangle just to fine tune it. Single triangles boost or reduce the effect by plus or minus 5. And the ones that look like a fast forward or a rewind, they work in increments of plus 20 and minus 20. But you don't really need to worry about those figures. All you need to do is make sure that the photo's looking good, the histogram's looking good, move on. Another benefit to working in this way is it's easy to compare photos as well. So if you have, for example, these photos of the chickens, this looks like a pretty good exposure to me, but right side by side, you have this one and you can see that that is much darker than this photo. And so you can use this visually as a reference point and make adjustments here. So if I boost the exposure up +1, straight away I can see that the tone of the chickens matches the tone in this photo much better, and working in that way can help to unify your photos and you'll end up with a much better matched series of photos. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to make some changes here and I'm going to try and do this just a little quicker so you can see exactly how this works. Bring the sky back here in this one. Now I spoke about white balance before and I said I leave that alone because I trust the camera, but it doesn't always nail it, and so I like to make my adjustments here in this quick develop module. And just like when we looked at the exposure of the chickens here, it's really good for doing it comparatively. So this photo here actually looks like it's got quite a blue cast to it. So all we need to do is come to the temperature, click the button on the right to push it into the warmer tints, and just like that we've got a better color balanced photo. And you can go through all of your photos and make little adjustments like that. Again, quite a cool looking image. Make it warmer. If you think it's too warm, you can make just those micro adjustments. Boost the exposure, maybe that's too far, micro adjustment, move on. Photos like this one here, for example, might require quite a lot of tweaking. If you're working in the develop module, you might spend quite a while here moving things back and forth, trying to get it right. Whereas if you're in this library quick develop mode, it's so much easier just to make these adjustments really quickly. And if the tint is too green, you can boost that up into the magentas. So if I jump to the develop module and just show us our before and our after, we can see that all of a sudden with those changes, that preset that we've created and just a couple of clicks of adjusting the highlights and the blacks down, we've been able to go from this to this. And if I zoom in, you'll actually be able to see, we can barely see the horses and the hay. I make those quick changes and we're in a pretty good place. And absolutely, I could do more editing on this to improve it for sure. But look, these are just personal photos. They're just for me, just for my eyes. I could do local adjustments. I could play with the tone curve. Yes, I could do all of that stuff. But here's the point. They're not going to go anywhere other than a personal photo book, maybe Facebook. But I really don't want to over-capitalize in terms of my time. And that's why I love doing the editing in the way that I showed you. I've just spotted a particularly problematic photo. These ones I shot of my daughter on the quad bike and I photographed them straight into the sun. I see that there's 5 photos that all look similar. So what I'm going to do is work on all of them at the same time. So I click the first one, shift click on the very last one. I've got one rogue one which doesn't really fit in terms of how I need to process it. So I'll just hold the control key, click on that to take it away. If I want to see the photos larger, obviously I just grab the thumbnail slider and bring that up. And I'm going to work on this one, and any changes I make here will be propagated across all 5 of those photos. All right, let's open this one up, and I'm just going to click the backslash key, and here's our before, here's our after. What a difference. This shot looks like it's only good for the bin, whereas this one we've been able to bring back all of that detail in the shadows. And not only that, but we've made those changes to these other photos at the same time. Okay, I'm going to stop jibber jabbering and I'm just going to make these changes how I normally would, and you guys can watch how quick it is. As I'm working through these, I've just spotted this one and I just wanted to bring your attention to what you can do. This reminded me very much of what these ones looked like before I did any processing. So the chances are we can borrow what we did here and apply it to this. So all we need to do is just click Sync Settings, click Synchronize, and we have an improvement. It's not perfect, but it's a good starting point. And just like that, we have edited 156 photos. So what I'm going to do so that you can see a quick comparison is select all the photos, create a virtual copy, and I'm going to come into the develop section. And while we've got auto sync on, I am going to reset all of these changes and jump back to grid mode. And now you can actually see a direct side-by-side comparison, the raw photo straight from the camera and the version that we were able to make. So for example, we've got this image here. And if you were going for a silhouette of this goat eating, brilliant, you've nailed it. But I wasn't. I could actually see the image so much more like this with my own eyes when I was there. And so simply by applying that preset that we created at the beginning, during the import process, and then a couple of clicks in the quick develop menu, we are able to transform that photograph from this to this. There you have it, guys. 2 simple steps to get your photos edited really quickly inside of Lightroom and looking pretty good. Absolutely, I could improve those photos further. But here's the thing. My time, like yours, is valuable to me. And I really don't want to spend too long working on photos that are just for me, just personal photos. So using that 2-step process of applying a good generic preset when you import your photos, and then using the quick develop module in the library just to quickly boost the exposure, boost the shadows, drop the highlights perhaps, drop the blacks, whatever you need to do. Some photos don't even need anything doing to them. You're quickly able to produce a photo that looks pretty good. Let me know in the comments if this video has been of use to you. I haven't done a Lightroom video for a little while, so I do hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you're new to the channel and you're interested in photography and photo editing, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm a professional photographer and I freely share all the information that I've accumulated over the years with you guys. So thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.